Bartholomew Town is brought to you in part by the University of Rhode Island Online, Navigant Credit Union, the Audubon Society of Rhode Island, Newport Film, and Half Street Group.
Bartholomew Town.
Well, we certainly have been profiling one of the major, it's a global crisis, but one of the major crises facing Rhode Island, and that, of course, is that the housing crisis. I mean, it's reflected in so many different ways. It's not simply housing prices or simply inventory. There's so much to this discussion. There's so much nuance to it. And that's exactly why today we have this roundtable that's drilling down on a very specific issue that I think has been completely overlooked. In fact, in all of the work I've done on housing, I haven't ever encountered this particular issue, but it's significant and it impacts thousands of Rhode Islanders. And it's something that if we're not paying attention to, has the potential to spiral even more out of control. And in sum, it's HOA costs. And I'm going to read for you very briefly here a piece of legislation introduced by Representative June Speakman, who will join us here on this roundtable. And I'm going to read you the summary here. Property condominium law this bill would restrict increases in monthly common expenses and limit special assessments to cover unforeseen costs not included in condo associations' approved annual budget for common expenses in associations where the minority of the units are deed-restricted units. Translation, condo fees on affordable housing and how this can, in many ways, drive the would-be affordable housing into another realm. So we've got a vast array of really significant voices here, and it's an honor to share time with all of you. I guess let's just go around and associate the human being with the voice working in our Hollywood Squares model here. Top left across, we'll start with Senator Valverde. If you just want to introduce. Hi.
Glad to be here this morning. Thanks for bringing this conversation, bringing us all together this morning.
Of course. And Councilor Engleart.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Melina, if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure. Melina Lodge. I'm the Executive Director of the Housing Network and Community Housing Land Trust of Rhode Island. Thanks for having me this morning.
Of course. Rep Speakman.
I'm Rep June Speakman from District 68, Bristol and Warren, and I need to give credit for the bill to Senator Valverde. She is the one who got the ball rolling on behalf of the person you'll hear from next and approached me as the House sponsor. So all credit goes to Bridget.
Okay. Of course, I chose randomly the House bill to read, so there it is.
It's all right.
And that person you mentioned, Leigh?
Thanks for having us, Bill. My name is Leigh Curtin Wilding. I'm a semi-retired educator, grandmother of 3, and in 2021, I bought a low to moderate income condominium here in East Greenwich, Rhode Island, and later realized some of the constraints financially and legally that we're facing. And that kind of put the ball in motion of getting in touch with all of these folks that are on your podcast today. So thank you for helping shine a light on this.
Of course. All right. So let's set the table a little bit with a little more clarity. So you bought essentially what would be designated lowercase a affordable housing in a condominium. And if I'm not mistaken, the core of this issue is that in tandem with any other expenses that a quote unquote normal housing would have, HOA fees they're essentially unrestricted, and they can drive the cost of these houses out of what would be considered affordable. Is that a fair assessment of essentially what we're talking about here today?
Yes, absolutely. So when I purchased my home in 2021, just by way of background, I was working at a university and my salary was cut during COVID. So I was renting an apartment in Boston. I didn't think I'd ever own a home again. My daughter-in-law and I found this little cottage in East Greenwich. So there are 15 units in this condominium complex. 5 of them are low to moderate income reserved, so for deed restricted owners. When I bought in, I knew that there were deed restrictions, which meant I would be limited, if ever, to have any equity in my home. I understood that I couldn't rent it. You can't pass along in an estate. I understood what the restrictions were because that keeps it affordable for the next family. So as I said in my letter, you kind of feel like you're part of a group ordering pizza, but then somebody else in your group orders lobster. And when the food arrives, all you have is the money for a slice of pizza. Should you help pay for the lobster? Our lobster came by way of a $63,000 painting contract that our board approved without significant owner input. Even if you have owner input, there are only 5 of us, so we are outvoted by 10 by the other owners here. It can be something like a discretionary. We want the paint on as in our case, to be to look aesthetically pleasing versus saving money for necessary costs. What happened was my HOA fees and assessments nearly doubled, so they went from $317, which at the time I thought I could afford this, to $587 a month. That was an 85% increase. That's over $7,000 in a year in fees just for the HOA and the assessments. It's nearly a third of what my annual mortgage is. So if you can't afford to make these payments, what happens to us? There's nothing legally to protect us. You lose your voting rights on the board. You can have fines and fees in addition to liens, and ultimately you can be displaced from your home with no financial ruin. Actually, it can be irreversible loss financially. So that kind of gives you some real-time idea of how this is going on.
All right, let's follow the travel of this now to the State House. Senator and Representative, how did you become aware of this issue, and why did you introduce the legislation that you did?
Sure. So I am. So I represent Leigh. I represent East Greenwich in the Senate. So Leigh got in touch with me and explained the situation that she was faced with. To be honest, at the time, I had no idea that this was an issue at all. But she let me know that it wasn't just her; that there were some other people around the state who were facing similar hardships. So she had already been in touch, I believe, at the time with Melina, and had already reached out to Councilor Engleart about this as well. So we all kind of came together and to work on a bill that we thought would begin to address some of these issues. So we first introduced the bill in the 2024 session, and we've introduced it again this year as well.
And Rep. Speakman, on that note, you've done so much work on housing for sure. How does this kind of fit into the broad, if you will, bundle of issues that you've encountered?
So, as you know, I'm the chair of the Housing Affordability Commission. This is a challenge for affordability, as Leigh explained so well. Melina and I work very closely on bundles of bills, whether they're in the speaker's so-called package or outside. And this is something that we did not pay any attention to at all. As you explained at the beginning, it's been sort of an invisible problem until Leigh brought it to the senator's attention, and then I got involved in the conversation. Senator Valverde and I have been working together for a long time on a bunch of things, and Melina sort of gathered the group together, and I put the bill in on the House side.
A lot of issues, if not all issues with housing, seem to come down to the municipal level. We can pass suites of bills out of Smith Hill, and if municipalities aren't willing to engage, then sometimes it becomes irrelevant. Case in point would be Johnston, where they used a bunch of gimmick policy maneuvers to block an affordable housing building project that was, that would have brought nearly 300 affordable units to Johnston. So, Councilor Engleart, is the appetite in East Greenwich to expand options for affordable housing? And if so, how do you react to what's happening here with these HOA fees?
Thank you for the question. So one of the issues that has come up is, just to be clear, cottages on the green where Leigh lives was built for affordable housing overall, including the market rate units. The idea was to have a place for older folks or young people who are just starting out to move into. So the entire project was conceived, and you can actually look it up in the architect and the builder's website for that reason. East Greenwich is like, I think, a lot of suburban towns overall with affordable housing. There's a lot of naysayers particularly people who live in houses that have been there for like 20, 30 years, and they for some reason think that affordable housing isn't needed or required. I can tell you for a fact, if you go back in archives for East Greenwich, you can find letters going back to the 70s and the 60s that ask for affordable housing, that East Greenwich was already becoming unaffordable for older folks and for young families trying to move in. So right now we have a huge couple of projects that are coming due. Actually, one is right across from the street from where I live, and the other one is further down the street. Both of those have they have created a lot of social drama. I think in the end, what I say to most of my constituents is that there's about 20 people who make the most fuss and noise. Most people recognize that you need to build housing, and we are getting mostly applications for condos, not single family housing. So that creates another issue for us, because people we found that were moving into condos were mostly older folks or young people with no children. So condo fees, the HOA fees that Leigh has experienced, this type of thing. I mean, we have a project in town where the condo fee is $1,000 a month. I'm not sure how that's sustainable at some point. I mean, and we don't, as a municipality, ever regulate something like that. That is a private group of individuals on their own residence. So we rely on the state, unfortunately, for Bridget and June to pass legislation to oversee that. I can tell you our solicitor has no appetite for getting involved with HOA fees locally.
Interesting. Melina, when you look at the holistic picture right now of housing in Rhode Island and an issue like this, how many of these types of, I don't want to say tributary because it seems to diminish the situation, but how many of these sort of overlooked left turns, unexpected type of, oh yeah, that makes sense, scenarios are we facing, and how does this HOA conversation fit into the big picture of addressing affordable housing in Rhode Island?
Well, I mean, I think the challenge is sometimes you only figure out what the problems are, once you try a solution on for size. And I think, the challenge for deed restricted affordable housing is that most people don't fully understand that the deed restriction and the affordability is really only assessed at the conveyance, right? So we cannot promise ongoing affordability in the in-between space, because condo fees, taxes, homeowners insurance, people's income changes, right? So it's very difficult to say this is perpetually affordable to that person. But we did identify this, or I identified this as a problem years ago, because you can see that this is a price escalation thing. And unfortunately, condominiums have not been a predominant housing style. Other states have adopted much stricter or bounded guidelines around how condominiums work. Our laws are very generic and loose. And not because I don't think, somebody didn't care about it, but because that isn't the predominant housing topology in our state. Single family homes make up 87% of our housing stock. And so I think the challenge is that because it wasn't a type of housing we were building, we didn't spend a lot of time and energy. But, under the speaker's housing package and a lot of the other housing reform that we're going to be contemplating in the years ahead, if we really want to make meaningful progress, it's going to mean that we have to consider condominiums and townhomes, which will still have an HOA fee, as a type of housing stock. And so it is important, it is unfortunate in this moment. There are, it's probably not thousands at this point because homeownership hasn't been the predominant affordable development. It's predominantly been rental. But we know we're going to go in that direction. And so we should solve for this problem now. We also have a tax assessment bill that is in the House and in the Senate by Senator McKinney and Representative Fogarty that would provide a little bit of predictability on tax assessments for affordable homeowners, again, to get at as best as we can control for that in-between period, knowing that costs are often out of our control, how do we provide a little bit more guidance to make sure we can do the best that we can?
Is there an appetite on Smith Hill for this issue in terms of getting this bill passed? And I guess we'll start with the senator, given that you sort of initiated this process. Do you sense that in the Senate there's an appetite for this?
Yeah, I mean, there is. I think we had a good hearing in the Senate Housing and Municipal Government Committee, and I know I've talked to a couple of the members of the committee, and they do have an interest in exploring this issue further. I can't say whether or not we will absolutely get there this year, but it is. It's an area that there is interest in dealing with moving forward.
And Rep. Speakman on the House side?
Yeah, I agree with that. And once you hear Leigh tell her story, you are wondering why this hasn't come up sooner and why we haven't tried to tighten up those generic and loose condo laws that Melina referred to. The hearing in the House was also okay, although there were a couple of lawyers who were an insurance agent who work in the condo area who think we're not quite ready yet with the details and that we do need further work on it. But I think, again, after hearing Leigh, I don't think we can wait too much longer. We don't want people to lose their homes. The whole point of affordable units is to get folks into homes that they can stay in as long as they wish. So we really do need to figure out something to do.
Leigh, your sort of executive summary, hearing what we've heard today on the podcast, are you optimistic that you're going to be able to stay in your home and that others in a similar position as you are, that this is the ball is being moved forward in a way that seems optimistic, or does this require a little bit more of a pressure campaign than even you've got going right now with op-eds and the engagement of municipal and state and we'll call it nonprofit sector voices?
Yeah, Bill, thanks. That's a great question. And I think we need more pressure and more attention to this. This legislation was first introduced last year and again this year. We really cannot wait. And a fix also needs to include some retroactive protections, whether that's hardship accommodations or something. I was speaking with Councilwoman Engleart recently, and I said, I'm not sure if I can hold out for another year, maybe 2 years, while we wait for some changes. We discussed getting in touch with HUD and getting myself on some lists for senior housing. So I did. I went down and asked about that. There are long wait lists, but just as a safety net. And I was told that in 2025, there were changes made to the Housing Opportunity through Modernization Act, something called HOPMA. And it makes it harder for seniors who own real property, I'm putting that in air quotes, to qualify for subsidized housing, even if their deed restricted home has no equity and can't be rented. So we're priced out of our homes, yet we're still blocked from safer alternatives. So this is just a real conundrum with no solution in sight for us right now.
Right. Well, good legislation, good to have allies at the municipal level, in spite of what may be some opposition or at least indifference at the municipal level. Anybody else have any other thoughts on this matter?
I'd like to just say, oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Councilman.
That this is going to be a bigger issue for us going forward. East Greenwich is aging. As we are not building single family homes, we are not attracting the same demographic that East Greenwich is known for. So we are getting a lot of older folks that are moving to town. A lot of them, like Leigh, from out of state, some of them from within state. And we have a lot of, and I continually tell people this, we have a lot of older folks that are trapped in their large houses. So people who have bought houses 30, 40 years ago, they are unable to sell them because they are unable to move into something that's affordable. And the problem that Leigh is facing, this sort of HOA fee that, escalates no rhyme or reason, is going to be a bigger and bigger headache. And on the municipal side, we do not have the extra money to help people like Leigh to, bridge that gap. So this is sort of an all hands on deck type of situation for local, municipal, the state, obviously, the federal government, and nonprofit as well.
And Melina?
Yeah, I was going to add that, Lee's situation and homeowners like her is a very specific circumstance, but I think for the listeners, it's important to emphasize that it is not just, deed restricted affordable owners who are impacted by this. Condominiums and townhomes are a more naturally occurring type of affordable housing because they are consolidated, they tend to be smaller, a lot of the infrastructure is shared. And so we do see a lot of people moving into condominiums, particularly older adults who have really owned single family homes historically. They're not used to this idea of a condo fee. But just because you live in a market rate condominium doesn't mean that you can afford, condo fees that are doubling or tripling every 5 years. So I do think there is broader impact in solving for this problem, to make sure that housing remains affordable, even if it's not deed restricted, if it's going to be a housing type that we are pushing to develop as we're trying to solve our housing crisis. It's going to require denser housing, and that means condominiums and townhomes will be the type of housing we're building. We cannot build single family homes to solve our housing crisis.
Yeah. Sorry, Johnston. Any other thoughts on this?
So the Housing Affordability Commission's June meeting will focus on this topic. We'll have, I think Leigh will be there, Melina, and another expert, and we'll see if we can't look at alternative solutions or some kind of relief for folks who are, especially in the affordable units, the deed restricted units.
Excellent. Thank you all so much, first of all, for your time today, but also thanks for your work on this. It's these issues are, people say we got to solve the housing crisis, and you hear vague notions of how this is going to happen, miscellaneous numbers thrown out, miscellaneous dates. The reality is, if we're going to solve the housing crisis, it's going to require drilling down on the specifics, and that means engaging citizens or residents, I should say, nonprofit, state, municipal, all stakeholders on specifics. And this is a real practical example of drilling down on specifics. That's how we're going to get through this crisis. It's not going to be through, sort of the big picture matters, but you can stand there and say a bunch of things. If you're not drilling down on specifics, good luck. Thank you all so much.
Thank you for your attention to it, Bill.
everyone.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hey, thanks for stopping by Bartholomew Town. For more content, follow me on Instagram @BillBartholomew.